I keep wondering when Sydney Sweeney stopped feeling like a person to the internet and started feeling like a presence. Not just a celebrity, more like a recurring emotional reference point that seems to appear everywhere. Everywhere. And what's strange is that I don't think this happened because of anything she deliberately did. It feels more like the internet quietly agreed on it. One day, she was an actress in popular shows. The next, she felt familiar. Not familiar in the sense that you recognize her face. Familiar in the deeper sense where your brain starts treating someone like they're part of your life, even though they aren't. And that's what makes her interesting. Because Sydney Sweeney feels less like a celebrity people follow and more like a collective projection that happens to have a real person inside it. And that's what I want to talk about. Not Sydney Sweeney the individual, Sydney Sweeney as a case study in manufactured familiarity. Online, exposure often replaces proximity. You don't need to know someone. You just need to see them enough times in enough contexts that your brain creates a sense of continuity. Clips, interviews, scenes, memes, edits. Eventually, someone stops feeling like a stranger and starts feeling like someone you know. Sydney Sweeney is a useful example because she sits at the intersection of emotionally intense roles, accessible interviews, and constant online circulation. Over time, she becomes emotionally familiar, and familiarity is powerful because the human brain often trusts what feels familiar long before it evaluates what's actually true. Sydney Sweeney rose to prominence through television and streaming era dramas that emphasized emotional storytelling. Her public identity was never built around one defining narrative. Instead, it emerged through fragments, performances, interviews, character associations, and endless online circulation. She represents a modern form of fame that is highly visible but loosely defined. And when a public figure lacks a single fixed identity, audiences naturally fill in the gaps themselves. At some point, I realized people don't just watch her, they complete her. Online, she becomes an open loop that people fill with assumptions, narratives, and interpretations. And that's where this stops feeling like ordinary celebrity culture. The internet doesn't just distribute people anymore, it distributes interpretations of people. These interpretations get repeated, shared, and reinforced until they start feeling like reality, even when they're based on very little. Eventually, a person stops functioning as an individual and starts functioning as a reference point. And I think that's what happened here. Not suddenly, gradually, almost invisibly. Modern celebrity exists inside algorithmic systems where the images travel independently of context. Recognition is often built through repeated exposure rather than sustained engagement with someone's actual work. Certain individuals become highly visible because their image adapts well to constant circulation. Sydney Sweeney's visibility is amplified by acting roles, media coverage, and social platforms that continuously resurface her image. The result isn't simply fame, it's familiarity without genuine connection. This is the part that fascinates me. Familiar doesn't mean known, but the brain often treats it that way. After enough exposure, someone becomes emotionally readable. Not because you understand them, but because you have developed the feeling that you do. That's why conversations about public figures can sometimes sound less like discussions about strangers and more like discussions about people inside our personal world. It's a modern version of the parasocial relationship. Not one person feeling attached to one celebrity, but millions of people sharing the same illusion of familiarity at the same time. And once you notice that, an uncomfortable question appears. Are we reacting to the person, or are we reacting to repetition? The obsession isn't really about Sydney Sweeney as an individual. It's about the emotional coherence built around her image. Television roles create emotional reference points. Social media amplifies those moments. Commentary and edits add new layers. Eventually, a hybrid identity emerges. Part performance, part projection, part algorithmic repetition. What people often respond to is not the personal self, but the sense of stability created by seeing the same face repeatedly in an environment defined by endless information. To be clear, this isn't about blaming her. If anything, she's an example of something that would likely happen to almost anyone under similar conditions. Once visibility reaches a certain scale, the image starts sustaining itself. The person becomes less important than the meaning attached to them. That's the uncomfortable reality of modern fame. It doesn't require distortion, it just requires repetition. Enough repetition and meaning begins to feel automatic. This story lingers because it reveals how identity functions in digital environments. Parasocial relationships no longer depend on direct emotional attachment. They can emerge from endless exposure to fragmented representations that create familiarity without depth. Sydney Sweeney is useful as an example because her visibility aligns perfectly with how modern media operates. The unsettling realization is not that people misunderstand her. It's how easily closeness can be simulated and how convincing that simulation can become. I think the strangest part is how normal all of this feels. It's just media, just exposure, just repetition. Yet, somehow, it creates the feeling that we know people we have never met, that they're part of our environment, part of our lives. And I keep coming back to this thought that familiarity used to come from shared space. Now it can come from repeated absence. At first, that sounds like a small shift until you realize how many relationships in your mind may not be relationships at all, just patterns, just images that learned how to feel close. And I don't really know what to do with that realization. It doesn't resolve into a lesson, it just stays there, like a face you recognize a little too well for no real reason.